Hey guys, my name is Enimas, and here is my ultimate Brewmaster guide. First, I'll start with explaining a bit about this guide. This guide consists of 6 parts, and you can find the navigation at the bottom of this video. In this first part, I'm going to do a short introduction about myself and my experience, following up on the pros and cons of Brewmaster tanking. In the second part, I'll go through our artifact weapon from talent paths to relics. The third part will be about talents. I will, for example, include different builds for different Mythic Plus affixes. This chapter will be a bit longer as I try to cover all possible tanking situations. What to equip and what trinkets to use will be covered in the fourth part. This one will also be a bit longer as I try to explain mastery breakpoints and why haste is so important for us. The rotation and skill priority will be explained in the fifth part. This part will also cover the basics of your tanking. The sixth and final part will be all about sharing my tips that I gather along the way with you. This specific part I recommend for those who want to take their tanking to a high-end Mythic Plus level. A bit about myself. I played Monk since Legion launch, and even if it doesn't sound so long, the class got huge changes from the Legion expansion launch that it's pretty much new playstyle anyway. I received my plus 15 achievement a few days ago, and I've cleared quite a few Mythic plus 14s and 15s before this achievement. But enough about me, on with the guide you came here for. Why Brewmaster? A lot of people have very bad experience with Brewmaster tanking, and this was even discussed a few weeks back in a World of Warcraft Q&A.
Any chance you'd be willing to discuss your thought on Brewmasters and their current state? To most of the community, they are almost an instant decline when trying to pugs. Part of the issue, possibly with the class design itself, but part of the issue is,
It totally is. It totally is. Brewmasters are really good. Brewmasters are really, really, really strong right now. They just have a different feel to other tanks. I think.
I agree on some parts of that. Brewmasters are viable, but looked down upon. Here are my pros and cons. Pros. Let's start off with mobility. We have both roll and transcendence, but we also deal a lot of range threat. Self-sustain. We have a godlike brew called Fortifying Brew. We can ignore certain mechanics. We have a lot of self-heals, especially if we spec to healing elixir. And we also have a very high dodge chance. Fight control. We have easy positioning due to high mobility. We can kite together with our huge amount of range skills. We can sap. We can leg sweep or AoE taunt depending on how we have talented. No spike damage. This is basically how stagger works. A high amount of physical damage goes into stagger, meaning that the spike damage will be less. And then we move on to the cons. We do way less damage on single target than on any other tank, and hopefully it is going to get a bit buffed in 7.1.5. We will see. Long cooldowns. Every class has long and short cooldowns, but for Brewmasters we have two specific very long cooldowns. We have Zen Meditation, which is 5 minutes, can be shortened with a legendary, and then we have Fortifying Brew, which is also 6 minutes, which gets shorter every time we use Cake Smash. These I consider very long cooldowns, and they might affect your gameplay. You can't spam them like Survival Instinct, for example. But with this said, we also have short cooldowns, some of which are very strong, for example Healing Elixir. 2 charges, 30-second recharge heals us for 15% of our max HP. I still see this as a con because it is in our core abilities. Harder time to learn our mitigation. Compared to other tanks, we have way harder time balancing our Purify together with our Iron Skin Brew that share cooldown, while other tanks just have to press one button for their mitigation. Gear requirement. Every class and spec has favored gear stats, of course, but for Brewmaster it feels that it really needs the haste for our brew management. This of course depends on what type of content you do. For longer fights, for example raid bosses, haste is the most wanted stat. In Mythic Pluses, in my experience, you don't need the high amount of haste, you can succeed with even lower haste. Moving on to part 2. Alright, our artifact weapon. We start of course off with the artifact skill there, and full keg increases damage by Keg Smash. Then we go into Potent Kick, increases duration of Iron Skin Brew. And then Hot Blooded, this is our most important talent. It gives pure damage reduction if you hit the Breath of Fire on the enemy. Then we go into Facepalm. This gives better brew regen if you hit and proc with it with Tiger Palm. Then we take Obstinate Determination. This gives an extra health orb if you drop below 35%. This means more healing if you fall very low. Then we go into Obsidian Fists, sorry. Increases crit chance of Blackout Strike. Meh, it's not that important. Overflow. Your healing spheres have a 15% chance instead of proccing into a bigger heal. Yay. Then we take Brew Stash. We gain 10% dodge for 4.5 seconds after Purify or Iron Skin Brew. Then we go into Dark Side of the Moon. Blackout Strike makes next melee attack on you a bit reduced, 2% per skill. Smashed, longer range on Keg Smash. This is a very handy tool. Then I would actually say Max HP. This one increases your Godlike Brew, Fortifying Brew, and it is already so strong that I don't really see a point in taking it just yet. We are at the moment at level 22, meaning that you are basically stepping into Mythic pluses now, or at least you should be. So I vote for HP. And then we take a kiting tool. This one is very strong for kiting. Every time you take a brew, you get movement speed stacking up to 5 times. This can be kept on at all time. And after this, as said, now we are already Mythic Plus, so DPS is a thing that tanks also need to do. I said we take Dragonfire Brew. It increases your damage a bit, not by like a huge amount, but still a bit. And seeing Mythic Pluses is against the time, so yeah, this one. And then we start buffing the Fortifying Brew with that one, and then Fortification, making it into a godlike brew. And then the last talent is a pure, a horrible DPS increase, but like a DPS increase. A bit of crit chance after dodging or healing. Healing with Gift of the Ox. And then of course that one that increases 10% armor. Then when we look at the relics, I say go for Hot Blooded if you can. This is pure damage mitigation right here. Other strong and valid options are Facepalm, making your brew management a bit easier, together with Potent Kick that also makes your brew management easier. And then we also have Overflow, meaning that you will proc bigger heals. If you get a procced heal, it increases your healing a lot, so it is quite nice. Then some weaker ones are Dark Side of the Moon, reduces next auto attack against you by 2% each trait. It's valid, but it is weaker. And rest is just like, this one is quite pointless. Then we have Obsidian Fists is also very pointless. And then Staggering Around. Your fourth brew is already so strong that it doesn't need to get stronger. And just to recap, here are the things that I just talked about. The path to the right with a color scheme, and then relics to the left in priority that I would put them in. Alright, moving on to talents, probably one of the bigger chapters in here. Let me first start with explaining a bit of talents. Chi Burst, great in Mythic Plus trash pulls. It deals the most AoE damage, while Eye of the Tiger deals the most single target damage, and this is also seen as a bit of healing. Chi Burst also heals allies, and Eye of the Tiger also heals you. Chi Wave is, in my opinion, not worth it. If you want the single target that Chi Wave is meant for, you go for Eye of the Tiger, because your rotation is so full already. Second tier is mobility. I would say Chi Torpedo or Tiger's Lust. If you know that a mob or a boss will snare you, or that an ally will need movement speed, then I recommend Tiger's Lust. In all other situations, I vote Chi Torpedo. Celerity gives one more stack to roll, but I still don't see it worth it. The third tier is all about brew management. Light brewing increases your brew stacks by 1 and shorter cooldown on brews. However, Black Sox brew will result in more brews per minute. Gift of the Mists will receive a small buff in 7.1.5, going from 60% up to 75%, but I still don't see it as a valid option except if you're trying to solo something or that you're running without a healer. The fourth tier, Ring of Peace will get a buff in 7.1.5. It will now become a pushback. You will summon a circle at a location that will push mobs out of the circle. Then we of course have Dave, the Black Ox statue. That works very well together with Skittish when you have aggro issues, because Dave will allow AoE taunts. Then we of course have Leg Sweep, an awesome tool for Mythic pluses that does an AoE stun. The fifth tier is about survivability. At the moment, Healing Elixir is the strongest one, but there are coming major changes in 7.1.5. Diffuse Magic will be removed, and it will be replaced with a talent that allows Stagger to work better against magical damage. They still haven't finalized the amount of magic damage that goes into Stagger, so we will just have to wait and see. This will probably be one of the stronger talents in raids, especially against spellcaster bosses. Dampen Harm will also get a buff. Instead of having a limit to 3 attacks, it will now have a 10-second duration and reduces the damage income by 20 to 50% of damage depending on how hard it hits you. Tier 6 talent is all about playstyle. Rushing Jade Wind picks adds up very easily, and you can keep a very fast pace in a Mythic Plus dungeon with it, for example. Invoke Neozao is pretty pointless at the moment. The damage is small, and from my experience, the taunt it gives doesn't even work on dungeon bosses. Special Delivery is there for the damage. It gives more damage output than Rushing Jade Wind, but Special Delivery is a proc chance from chugging your brews. I suggest this talent for every single target opportunity, and it will bring more DPS in single target fights, like raid bosses. Tier 7, the last tier. This is probably the most discussed one. Blackout Combo is probably the most versatile and flexible talent out there, because it affects so many skills that you can use Blackout Combo, for example, on our Breath of Fire, or on the Stagger Pause, or on Keg Smash to reduce the brew cooldown even further. This talent gives us the best brew management, a bit more DPS, but it still requires way more focus, and from my personal experience, the effort isn't worth it. This talent requires so much focus on your rotation that you might lose your focus from the fight at hand. Elusive Dance is there for the dodge chance. For example, if you know on a boss you can't purify fast enough and it hits you to red stagger, then maybe this talent is better, because then you rely on dodging the whole hit instead of actually eating it. This talent also goes hand in hand with Necrotic. The more you dodge, the less stacks you build. So whenever Necrotic is up for me, I usually pick this talent. High Tolerance is my go-to when it comes to progress content. It reduces spike damage and also increases my haste. At the moment I am lacking haste in my gear, and this one makes up for it. However, High Tolerance also requires high-end Mythic pluses or raid, so you will actually hit yellow or red stagger, then it will become worth it. For lower Mythic pluses, I recommend going with Blackout Combo, because that doesn't reflect your stagger at all. And that was the explanation of the talents. Let's move on to some presets that I built up. The beginner one. Here we see Eye of the Tiger, Celerity, Light Brewing, Leg Sweep, Healing Elixir, Rushing Jade Wind, and Elusive Dance. Reasoning to this is, Eye of the Tiger is a passive ability. You don't need to focus at all on this talent. It's good for single target, it's good for multi-target as well. And then we have Celerity. It doesn't change your role at all, it just gives one more stack and shorter cooldown. For intermediate users, I recommend playing around with Tiger's Lust, and if you really dislike Torpedo, then Tiger's Lust against Celerity. Then the brew management. Light brewing, I recommend this for beginners, because Black Ox brew requires a bit of training to get used to how to effectively keep it on cooldown. Basically it should be on cooldown all the time. And light brewing is just easier to manage because it allows one more stack and shorter overall cooldowns on your brews. Then the fourth talent, Leg Sweep. Leg Sweep is good, as said, for beginners before they venture into raids, and even in raids you don't really need Ring of Peace and summon Black Ox statue. This talent tier doesn't really matter that much. The fifth talent row, before 7.1.5 hits, I still say go for Healing Elixir. It can automatically proc if you fall below 35%, but try to use it as early as possible so it goes on the cooldown. and try to keep one stack of it. It has 2 stacks, so try to keep one stack all the time on cooldown. On the 6th row, even if Rushing Jade Wind is an active ability, I still recommend beginners take that instead of Special Delivery, because they have more control over the fight. Rushing Jade Wind is on-demand AoE in case another pack gets pulled or they have to just deal AoE damage suddenly. And the 7th tier, I say go for Elusive Dance before you learn Blackout Combo, because if you are a beginner, you probably aren't doing high enough content that you would actually get yellow or red stagger for high tolerance. So Elusive Dance, even if you purify it at green, you still get a bit of damage and a bit of dodge chance, which helps you stay alive. It's just there because it is a passive ability and you don't need to think anything about it until you learn Blackout Combo. Alright, then we move to the next one, single target DPS build. This is for example for raid bosses. Again, we start off with Eye of the Tiger, the single target damage talent there. And then I take Chi Torpedo for fast movement. For example, raid bosses and dungeon bosses, they can't be kited at normal speed, so I always take Chi Torpedo because it gives both movement speed and it is further than a roll. And then I assume you're a bit familiar already with Brewmasters, so Black Ox Brew is the go-to. And then the 4th tier doesn't really matter about leg sweep against Dave, except if it's skittish, or if you really need to pick up ads, for example, then take Black Ox Statue. And then Healing Elixir, again 7.1.5, we're waiting for that one, so we can actually compare those talents, those new talents. Tier 6, here comes the Special Delivery in. It deals way more damage than Rushing Jade Wind, and Special Delivery is passive, and you don't need to think about it in your rotation. Every time you chug a Purify or Iron Skin Brew, you have a chance to proc Special Delivery, which throws a keg in the air and lands on the mob. It can crit for like half a mil or something. And then again, last tier, high tolerance against Blackout Combo. It is what you prefer. Blackout Combo pulls a bit more DPS, that is for sure. I just put high tolerance there because personally I don't play with Blackout Combo. And then we move to my favorite. This is my all-arounder, so to speak. This is what I push high-end Mythic pluses with. As you can see, I have Chi Burst for the trash. I have Chi Torpedo in case I need to move very fast, and I want the movement speed as well after the double Chi Torpedo. Black Ox Brew, that is the go-to for brew management. Leg Sweep for that extra CC. Healing Elixir to give me extra heals. Rushing Jade Wind for the on-demand AoE or ad picking up tool. Again, tier 7, high tolerance, playstyle preference, what you prefer. I prefer high tolerance over Blackout Combo. Both are very viable, and I'm not saying Elusive Dance isn't viable. We pushed the Blackroot Hold plus 15 with Elusive Dance, and I would also pick it again, because in Blackroot Hold, for example, the last boss first phase, he hits so hard and so fast that you really want to rely on dodge instead of high tolerance, because it is almost unhealable if you soak them all. At least that was our result with our current gear and our current setup. Alright, moving on. That was our presets. So as you can see, a lot of talents are very viable, and it depends on the dungeon, the situation. Play around with the talents as much as you want, but I can say some talents I never pick is Chi Wave, Celerity, not anymore. I used to pick Celerity quite often, but now I prefer Chi Torpedo. Light Brewing, I never pick that anymore. I do play around with Gift of the Mist when I try to solo, for example, some bosses. I am also going to look into Gift of the Mists when 7.1.5 hits, and also if we ever are going to run with 4 DPSers, 1 tank into Mythic pluses. Ring of Peace, it's a fun PvP tool, and now with the changes coming, I might play around with it, but I honestly can't see it being good. I only use Dave, our Black Ox Statue, when it's skittish, otherwise I go with Leg Sweep. Diffuse Magic and Dampen Harm, sadly I don't use either of them until they receive the buff. Invoke Neo Zao, I never use that. It's just not worth it. Alright, with that said, we are done with talents and we move on to part 4, gear, and the stats. Here is my very short and recommended way of putting the stat priority. Try to get as much haste as possible, then mastery, then versatility, and then crit. Here's a bit of explanation why. Let's start off with haste. Haste until you're comfortable with the brew region. This is all about playstyle. Do you kite? Do you tank raid bosses? Do you only do mythic dungeons? Do you only do normal dungeons? How fast do the mobs and bosses die? Are we talking about questing where you actually don't even need to pop brews? I run around with about 17% at the moment. I do manage, but I would love to get it about 20, and that's it. I don't need more than 20. That is how I see haste at the moment. This is also because I run with high tolerance and I am usually at red stagger. You could argue that I don't purify enough, but it works out. I'm very comfortable with 20% haste. For those who use Blackout combo, I recommend getting a bit more than my 20% haste. Blackout combo requires more base haste than high tolerance. Then mastery. Mastery for the closest dodge breakpoint. As you guys probably can read from the tooltip, mastery increases the dodge every time we get hit. With this said, there are mastery breakpoints if we don't take the base dodge into account. If we have 33% mastery, that means every fourth attack misses. The first one is a hit, then you have 33% dodge. The second one is a hit, and then you're at 66. The third one can also be a hit, then you're at 99. And then the fourth one, let's be honest, like 1%, you can get hit, but it's not worth changing one gear, so you go over the cap. As said, breakpoints are a bit like guidelines, and you shouldn't read too close into it. You should just try to achieve it if you can get as close as possible. There are some awesome documents that explain the mastery dodge breakpoints. I can link them in the description, and there it also counts the 10% base dodge into account, for example. Do remember with breakpoint guides, they are guidelines. It's not like you have to go for them, but try to go as close as possible. Because if you're in the middle ground, then you have a bit pointless stats. Sure, they add dodge, but then for example you are 7% below 100% dodge or 7% above 100% dodge. And then we have versatility. I personally love versatility because it is just a basic overall damage reduction and damage increase. I don't think I need to explain it that more. It is a very hard stat to go into because you need so much of it to actually turn into percentage, but every small percentage helps. And then lastly we have crit. The reason I don't like crit is because it makes a crit chance makes your health jump very much. And the core of a Brewmaster is to smoothen out the damage intake. So why not also try to smooth out the healing intake? It's very predictable. For example, we had the problem with overhealing affix that our Holy Paladin critted for 4 million Holy Shocks. So what to do against that? Reduce the crit amount, because all your crit turns into the healer crit as well. This of course depends on what type of healer you're running with. If you're running with a Rest Druid, then it's not that important. But these are just my opinions. There are a lot of opinions out there. There is, in my opinion, no official stat weight that you should go this, and that is the Holy Bible, so to speak. I do not believe in that kind of things. A tank is all about what you feel comfortable with, and what your healer also gives feedback from. Me and my Holy Paladin friend Airmore have been going through a lot of dungeons together. He can say directly to me if I'm doing something weirdly, or like if I change a piece that he doesn't like, that he notices immediately in his healing that I require more healing, for example. Then he tells me it. So if you're running with a familiar healer all the time, talk to him and try to just form a bond, because a tank and a healer really needs to have a bond so they work very well together. If I would get to hand pick my stats, I would say 20% haste, about 40% mastery, rest into versatility, and maybe 5% into crit, and that's it. I think that would be the stat weight that I would enjoy the most. Also, a final thing about this is that in 7.1.5 they will change the secondary stats, how much secondary stats you need for one percentage. and I don't think it will change that much about the formula or the stat weight. You should focus on haste, then mastery, then versatility, then crit. I still think that will be the case. It's just that item levels will be worth way more due to the stamina and armor increase, and of course the agility one. But as you guys probably seen, Legion is very RNG when it comes to gear. It is basically like you don't get to choose what gear you go for. You just get something, and then it's either on very high proc 880 or then it's just rubbish. It's except if it's like 5 item levels close to each other, then look at the stats. That is my opinion, and I might get a lot of hate when I'm saying it like this, but my opinion is my opinion. But this has worked for me, so here we are. Anyway, moving on to the other part, trinkets. I'm not going to explain specific items because they just come and go and they have their stats. Nothing to explain more than that. I've explained relics and now it's trinkets. Trinket is the most important piece of gear you can have. Why do I say this? Because they give a lot of survivability. This trinket right here, Nightwell Residue, is probably my favorite trinket. If you look at it, it gives base mastery, meaning more dodge for you. And it also builds up stacks that can be consumed into an absorption shield. This one gives us an opportunity to either create a huge shield or then a few small shields over the fight. This trinket right here is my go-to. I use it in every equipment set I have, and it is a solid pick for every boss fight I can imagine. This can also be used against certain mechanics or spells the boss does, instead of using an actual cooldown. A second trinket that I highly recommend is Darkmoon Deck Immortality. This is a pretty basic trinket. It gives agility, and then it gives armor, and then it shuffles the deck for increased armor. This one is awesome against physical mobs and also physical bosses. I can see this as one of the best for raid bosses. And then something else I would also recommend is getting another absorption trinket together with Nightwell Residue. Nightwell Residue is special trinket in that regards that even if it has a use effect, it can still proc together with another use trinket. These two said trinkets, Nightwell Residue and Talisman of the Cragshaper, these are the two trinkets that I'm using. I can use them same time and create a huge absorption shield on me, which can tank a certain mechanic in a Mythic Plus dungeon, for example Oakheart's Grip. This can even be seen as a strong cooldown. Talisman of the Cragshaper has only 1 minute cooldown, and Nightwell Residue easily builds up 10 stacks by that 1 minute cooldown, so each 1 minute cooldown you can create a huge absorption shield for yourself. Another trinket that is worth mentioning is the Nerubian Husk. I see this trinket as a pure upgrade to Darkmoon Deck Immortality. It gives a lot of haste and it gives even better armor procs. The problem with this trinket is that it's very hard to farm. It drops in Violet Hold from Anub Esed. And as you guys know, from Violet Hold you can't choose which boss spawns. So it's very random that that boss spawns, and then it's very random that the trinket actually drops as well. And then it still needs to get Warforge or Titanforge into a very high item level. But seeing Darkmoon Deck Immortality has a cap of item levels of 855 at the moment, I am trying to farm the Nerubian Husk every week through Violet Hold Mythic. If it drops, I will definitely replace the Darkmoon Deck with this. Then another trinket that is very interesting, it gets released with the Night Hold raid. This one is basically a cheat death for tanks. I can imagine using this one as a cheat to not use a cooldown and let the trinket proc itself, and then just have the healer heal the extra. You can see this as an extra stagger amount, and they just out heal it instead of getting a one shot mechanic. And then of course there are the trinkets that give pure stats. They are nice, especially for raids, but in Mythic Pluses I do not recommend them because most bosses actually do heavy skills that you really want to pop something against. So double absorption relics against Mythic Plus bosses is, in my opinion, the way to go. And then for trash, feel free to use a pure stat one and, for example, the Darkmoon Deck Immortality, like 2 passive ones. Alright, that's all I have to say about gear and the trinkets, and we're moving on to the next part, the rotation. First we take a look at the offensive rotation, and here it depends on what talents you pick. The rotation for Blackout combo talent is to use Blackout Strike before every skill to maximize its effect. The skill priority is following. Keg Smash is the number 1 priority, second is Breath of Fire, and the third one is Tiger Paw. And just to remind you guys, use Blackout Strike before Keg Smash, Breath of Fire, and Tiger Paw to maximize its effect. Then we move on to Elusive Dance and High Tolerance talent. The skill priority here is pretty much straightforward. It is Keg Smash, Breath of Fire, Blackout Strike, and lastly Tiger Paw. However, if you're running low on brews and you really need a brew fast, use Tiger Palm above Blackout Strike, because Tiger Palm reduces the cooldown of your brews by 1 second and has a chance to proc to 2 seconds. And then a few skills depending on the situation. We start off with Exploding Keg. This is a hard hitter. It's seen as a defensive cooldown, but it also deals a lot of damage, so you can also use it as an offensive skill. Then we have Chi Burst. I use this mainly when I'm kiting, for example with Necrotic, that I roll a few steps back and then cast a Chi Burst and then a Keg. And then the third is Rushing Jade Wind. This is mainly used for picking up adds or having a fast pace in Mythic Plus dungeons. I recommend popping Chi Burst and Rushing Jade Wind just before you go in. For example, Chi Burst has a cast time, you start casting it, then you throw a Keg, and then you either walk in or roll in. And then when it comes to Rushing Jade Wind, I usually pop it before I throw my first Keg or walk into the combat. That ensures me to get the initial aggro of all mobs before they are stacked up. That was all about the offensive rotation, and now we're moving to defensive. Let me start with talking about our mitigation. We use Iron Skin Brew, we use Purifying Brew, and we use Black Ox Brew if it's talented. The basic concept of these brews is that you keep Iron Skin Brew 100% uptime, and then you purify when you have extras. Black Ox Brew should be on cooldown most of the time. If you have Black Ox Brew talented, when you initiate combat, I recommend chugging 3 Iron Skin Brews down, and then popping Black Ox Brew and then immediately 1 Iron Skin Brew. That way you have 4 Iron Skin Brews active, and then you will still have 2 brews left, either on purifying or putting more timer on the Iron Skin Brews. Do remember that Iron Skin Brew timer does stack, meaning that if you have Black Ox Brew talented, you can pop 6 Iron Skin Brews immediately after each other. Also a small note about the 100% uptime on Iron Skin Brew. This of course depends, are you kiting? An Exploding Keg can give you 3 extra seconds when you don't need the Iron Skin Brew active. But for most of the time, keep Iron Skin up all the time. I rather use Iron Skin Brew to have extra time rather than risk it and purify and then don't have Iron Skin Brew active. Because if a mechanic strikes you, it can one-shot you if it's a strong enough mechanic. That was our mitigation, and then we're moving on to situational defensives. This is quite a long list, so we start with Expel Harm. It's a heal when needed, it procs and it drops small orbs on the ground. You can either use Expel Harm skill or you walk over the orb to collect the HP. This heal can be either small or huge depending if it procs through artifact traits and how many orbs you have lying on the ground. And then we're moving on to Fortifying Brew. It's a huge defensive cooldown which gets reduced by Keg Smash because it is a brew. Zen Meditation is a huge absorb, usually for 1 attack. Those that have the legendary helm, it absorbs through multiple attacks. In 7.1.5, the legendary head will get also upgraded. It will reduce the cooldown on Zen Meditation by 50%. You will be able to move and it will last through the whole duration. Detox, you can dispel yourself if needed. This is good if your healer is busy healing people or if the healer can't dispel those set debuffs. Dampen Harm, this is a talent and it gives mitigation when needed. This will also get buffed in 7.1.5 where it will reduce 20 to 50% of your damage intake depending on how hard the attack hits. I will recommend this for raiding instead of Healing Elixir because Healing Elixir needs you to coordinate together with the healers. Transcendence, this is a very situational ability. It teleports you wherever you left your copy of yourself. It's not that actively in use, but it's still handy if you really need the mobility. Then of course we have Roll or Tiger's Lust or Chi Torpedo, and it gives mobility when needed. Effuse, self-healing when needed. do notice that it is a cast time, meaning that if you're tanking a boss, it's maybe not the best thing to start casting. Then we have leg sweep. Again, this is a talent. It gives an AoE CC, which is awesome in Mythic Plus content. And then everyone's favorite, healing elixir. This is an instant heal. Again, this is a talent. It gives 15% health every 30 seconds, 2 charges. I strongly recommend you coordinate with your healer when you're about to pop it. Alright, then we are moving on to the last part, tips and tricks. Let's start off with the Mythic Plus affixes. These are the 8 normal affixes that can appear, and the only ones missing from here are the ones that appear at level 10, Tyrannical and Fortified. However, I'm only going to talk about 3 of these, Necrotic, Overflowing and Skittish. These are the ones that affect your tanking the most. If we take the hardest one first, Necrotic. Every melee attack that hits you gives you a debuff, a stacking debuff that reduces incoming healing and also creates a damage over time on you. This debuff doesn't have a cap, meaning that unlimited stacks can be on you. Once you are about 35 stacks, your healing received is about 100% reduced, meaning that you won't get any heals. I usually start to kite around 15 to 20 stacks and then just let my healer DPS instead of me. I can still keep threat through keg smashes, exploding keg, chi burst, and even through breath of fire and rushing jade wind. The amount of stacks that you can have depends on your gear and how comfortable the healer is healing you. If you have, for example, a healer that can create absorption shields, meaning disc priests or holy priests, then you might be able to get a bit more stacks than, for example, with a rest druid. For Necrotic, I also recommend the double absorption relics because absorbs don't affect the Necrotic debuff. If you pop a 2 million absorption shield, you will still have the 2 million extra HP, so to speak. But do remember, stagger can't kill you, but the Necrotic dot can. Then we go to Overflowing. This is the healer's bane. This one causes all overhealing done by the healer to trigger a heal absorb on the target. This of course reflects on the amount of overhealing done. I just want to point out that it is only the healer that can proc this one, meaning that if you overheal with either healing elixir or expel harm, it does not create this shield. Certain classes that go very well hand in hand with this is rest druids, because their heal over times basically neglects the whole absorption shield. One hot tick creates the shield, the other tick will cancel the shield. And then if you're thinking about DPSers, Retribution Paladin's Lay on Hands is awesome tool against Overflowing. DPSers can't trigger the shield, meaning that Retributions can feel free to actually Lay on Hands you. The healers who probably suffer the most are Holy Paladins and their Holy Shock crits. Then we move on to Skittish. Every tank hates this affix. This one gives huge trouble skipping aggro even on single target, but luckily we have a talent that kinda counters this, and it is Dave the Black Ox statue. And just a small note that Skittish only works against tanks. Dave is not a tank, meaning that he actually generates the normal amount of threat. I strongly recommend you guys to get familiar with AoE taunt macros, meaning that it targets the statue, presses taunt and then targets the last target. That way you have an awesome AoE taunt for you. That was it about Mythic Plus affixes. I will make a playlist where I will also explain upcoming tips and tricks for those who are interested. I will add there when I find a new nice way of dealing with a mechanic, for example. So be sure to check it out in the future as well. That's it about this guide. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I hope you also learned something new today. If you have any questions at all, be it from beginner to advanced tanking questions or even specific boss tactics, feel free to post them below the video and I'll do my best to give you an answer. If you'd like to find more of my Brewmaster stuff, check out my YouTube channel and don't forget to subscribe. I also try to stream on a daily basis, which is also here on YouTube, and if you would like to keep a track when I go live, then drop a follow on Twitter as well, at EnimasGaming. Thank you for my part, and I hope to see you again.